Hi folks, welcome to my somewhat updated travel page. Last time we left off with a few cards on our travel page, and as you can see, I added a few more components. I added a carousel up top here, and I added a nav bar with a drop-down button. Now, as you can tell, it needs a lot of modifying. And when using Bootstrap, the rule of thumb is to first consult the documentation before you're tempted to go into your style sheet and try to use some of your own custom CSS style definitions to fix up a page. Now in this video, I'm going to show you how to use Bootstrap's documentation and some of the classes on Bootstrap to adjust and modify your components. You have two options of how to learn alongside with me. You can grab my travel template that's going to be in the components lesson and code alongside with me using my own personal template. Or you could watch the video and see how I modify some of the components on my own page, pause, and then try to go and attempt to do the same to your own page. The choice is yours. Alright, let's take it from the top here with the nav bar, and then as we go along the video, we will style and customize the rest of these components. I'm not going to really do much with the nav bar besides show you guys something that's important that won't even require us to go into Bootstrap's documentation. Many of the projects that you're going to build or that students are going to build are going to be multi-page projects. So I did that here by creating another HTML file and linking it to explore more destinations. So if I click on it, you'll notice that it opens and sends me to another page and it says hello under construction. Let me show you how I did that. So in my index.html file, I'm going to my nav bar and it is going to be part of the second nav item. And I put inside the href the name of the HTML file that I created, exploremore.html, and I'll show it to you guys. It has that header that we just saw, hello, under construction. Now you'll notice that it has the same exact styling as my home page, and I may not want to do that just so that the user can be able to visually know that they're on a different page. Well, why does it have the same exact styling as my home page? Well, it's because it's linked to the same style sheet. Right now, my it's called Explore More. Explore More file is linked to style.css, and so is the index file. What I can do is create another file, and I'm going to call it explore.css. This will be the unique custom style sheet for my Explore More HTML file, and what I'm going to do here is just change the name and do explore.css. Now, what's going to happen is I can go here and just for visual confirmation, I will change the background color to a different color. Background dash color. And then let's just give it a random color right now, blue. It's not going to look pretty, but we just want visual confirmation. And let's refresh the page. Alright, like I said, nothing pretty, but this is how you would link another HTML file to your page and how you would create and give it its own custom style sheet. Alright, so the next component that we're going to modify is this carousel. Brace yourselves, because whether or not you like it, students love using this component in their final projects. What we want to do is get them all to be the same size, height and width, without making them look like they have been squished or forced into a certain dimension. That's sometimes a little bit tricky to do, but I recently came across something that has been very helpful, and I'm really happy to share it with you all. If you notice, the height is what's different. The width is set to be 100 if you go to Bootstrap and if you go to Components. And if you check out any of the carousel examples, you'll notice that part of the code already predetermines the width of all the images here. And I think almost every example will have the width set to 100. I'm fine with keeping mine to 100. You could feel free to play with it if you want. But this is my carousel. One way to resize the images inside the carousel is to select the images and then give them a fixed height. So they all have this class called carousel item. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to use that class to select the images by doing period carousel item image. Let's say we decide to do a height of, I don't know, we'll start with 300 pixels for all of them, and let's see what happens when we do that. So right now, if I refresh the page, it looks horrible because what happens when you give them a fixed height or even a fixed width, you destroy the image's aspect ratio, which is basically the ratio between its width and its height, and it looks like it's being awkwardly forced into this dimension. Now, I tried to find a Bootstrap related solution for this, but I wasn't really that successful. Maybe you will be. And in cases like this, that's where I would put my Bootstrap documentation to the side and try my luck elsewhere with Google. I did come across a really useful CSS property called Object Fit that I want to show you all because it helped me resize the images and protect their aspect ratio. So it doesn't look like they're being awkwardly forced into dimension that's just not made for them. So here's the documentation for it. And with Object Fit, it does exactly what we want it to do. It's going to help us resize the images to fit the container that they're in and preserve their aspect ratio. And they do this example very similar to what we just did right now, where they have an image and they show you what happens when you give it a fixed height and width. It will look pretty awkward. It will look horrible because you're destroying the image's aspect ratio. With Object Fit, it will avoid that, and it gives you a couple of different values that you could explore. One that I will use is Object Fit Cover. It's going to help make sure that the image fills the entire dimension of the container that it's in. Maybe you could play around with Object Fit Contain to see what that does and if that works better for your carousel. So I'm going to bring that back. I'm just going to copy Object Fit here, and I'm going to bring it back, and I'm going to add it to my style sheet. And we'll do Object Fit Cover. Let's refresh the page. All right, so it looks a lot better. The height is still 300 pixels, and maybe I want to change the height to make it a little bit bigger, but you all will see here that what it did is it made the image fill the entire dimensions of the container, and it preserved the ratio of the width to the height of the image. So, and whatever just didn't fit in the container, it got clipped out. If you don't want your images to get clipped out, try using Object Fit Contain or adjust the height, which is what I'm going to do. I learned to avoid using units like pixels whenever I'm trying to resize something, since they're not responsive because pixels are absolute. And instead, I'm going to use units that are more relative, like viewport or sometimes percentages, which will make whatever I'm trying to resize a lot more fluid. I'm going to give the height a value of 50 VH, and that's going to take up 50% of the height of my window. So let's check that out in action. Refresh the page. It looks a lot nicer. And we're on to the next component, the cards. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with the cards. For starters, I want to center them. I want to make sure that they are centered just like the carousel. We learned how to do that before using the class that was in the row for the carousel called Justify Content Center. And I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to find the row that houses all three of my cards. There it is. And I'm going to also put it right here. And this will hopefully center everything inside the row, so all of these three cards will be centered. Alright, the cards are centered, but something is off about these cards. They are not behaving responsibly and not adjusting to my screen size and rather overlapping on each other. I think I know what's causing that. I'm going to head back to the code, and I noticed that all three of my cards are given a fixed size here, so let's remove them and see if that will help them play more nicely with my container. So let's remove this inline style for card 1, we'll remove it for card 2, and we will remove it also for card 3. Does that help? Yes, it does. So I'm already noticing that they are spaced farther away from each other, and they are playing more nicely with my container and dynamically sizing to my browser window. Great. It already looks a lot better. My cards are flexible, but I wouldn't really call their behavior responsive. This is not responsive. Because if they were responsive, they would resize differently to best fit across different screen sizes. But they're not doing that. They're still staying 3 cards stacked horizontally next to each other, regardless of whatever my screen size is. Well, why is that happening? Let's go check out the code. We locked them into this behavior when we gave each of them a class of call-3. While it might be okay for them to be stacked like this on a large screen, it starts to look pretty congested as we shrink the screen size down to a mobile device. It would be a lot better if each one of these cards took up more space as the screen size got smaller. Bootstrap has a way that we could do that. Bootstrap's grid system has a couple of classes that are going to be in the breakpoint section. We're going to go to layout, we're going to go to breakpoints, and there's a couple of classes that we can use here which can be specified alongside the column class to rearrange the columns depending on the screen size. Let's use some of these classes to create responsive columns that take up more space on a small screen and less space on a large screen. So how do I do this? I'm no longer going to say call-3, I'm going to be really specific. I'm going to say on a small screen, I want it to take up 12 column sizes. I want to take up the entire width of the row. And then I'm going to say on a medium-sized screen, I want it to take up maybe half the size of the row. And then on a large size screen, I think it would be okay to say, give it 3 column sizes. And I'm going to copy this and give each one of the 3 cards the same class. Oh, this was the 3rd card. Let's go back here to the 2nd card. And let's also do this to the 1st card. Let's see how this impacts the way my cards behave on different size screens. Right now on a large screen, they're taking up 3 column sizes each. But what happens when we make our screen size smaller? Beautiful, they're behaving responsively. Each one of these cards now is taking up a column size of 6 on a medium-sized screen. And what happens when we go down to a mobile device? Beautiful, they're taking up 12 column sizes each. All right, we did it, y'all. We used breakpoints to create responsive columns that are going to help us customize the layout of our content on different screens. Unfortunately, though, what I'm noticing is that there is absolutely no breathing space between my cards when they stack on top of each other. So how can we space our cards away from each other without having to break them up into different rows? And the answer lies in gutters. So let's check out the documentation for gutters on Bootstrap. We'll just search it here. Gutters. So what are gutters? Gutters are the padding or space between columns, and they can be used to control either the horizontal or vertical spacing between columns in our row. And if you check out the documentation, it'll tell you that gutters are sized from 0 to 5 in order of increasing gutter size. I'm going to apply vertical gutters to give my cards some breathing space when they stack on top of each other. So we'll go back to our code. I'll need to find the row that houses all 3 of my cards. It's right here. And I'm going to apply a class of GY, and let's say 4. I think that'll give it plenty of breathing space. Let's refresh the page and see what happens. We'll need to shrink down the size of the page to see if there is any spacing. Yep, and there is. Beautiful. There's spacing between all 3 cards. You could play around with the gutter sizes vertically, horizontally, but now that you know they exist, you can feel free to add some breathing space and add some padding inside your grid. The last piece is we want to give this the row that houses the card a margin top, so we could separate it from the carousel. Instead of having to do my own styling, let's search for it here. So I'll type in margin. I know it'll be in the spacing section, margin and padding. Let's read out the documentation. It tells me that we could use M for the class that sets margin, and that I know that the sizes are from 0 to 5, and we could specify whether we want it on the top, bottom, is it left, right? No, yeah, left or right. So I'm going to give it a margin top, so MT, and let's try to give it MT4. Let's see what that would look like. I'm also right here, I'm going to do MT-4. Let's refresh the page. Hip hip hooray. We have margin top. We separated the carousel from the cards. Our page looks a lot better than it did when we first started, and we did a lot in this video. We resized the images on the carousel, we created responsive columns for our cards, we added gutters between them, and a margin between these 2 rows. And there still feels like there's plenty to be done. I would never sit and do this all in one sitting with students. It might be worth showing them how to use breakpoints to create responsive columns, and maybe one other styling tip. But from here, I hope you realize that sky is the limit for what you can do, and I hope you're leaving a lot more comfortable using Bootstrap. Remember though, whenever you're using Bootstrap, first consult Bootstrap's documentation to find Bootstrap-specific solutions before you search elsewhere. As you saw, in some cases, we needed to apply our own style definitions, but for most cases, we found some pretty useful Bootstrap classes that helped us out. Happy coding from here, y'all, and I'll see you all in the next unit.